So this kind of results really makes two main points. The first one is that not all media are created equal. You can't compare the effect of multimedia tasking and the effect of playing action games. They have totally different effects on different aspects of cognition, perception, and attention. Even within video games, I'm telling you right now about these action-packed video games. Different video games have a different effect on your brains.
This line from Bavuller's TED Talk on cognitive effects of video games on your brain got me thinking. If different genres produce different cognitive effects, which genre produces the most positive cognitive effects? Hi, my name is Ali Ashraf, and by Matthew Gladwell's definition, I am a master at video games as I have over 10,000 cumulative hours in multiple different types. To figure out which genre had the most positive cognitive effects, I went out and found several research papers testing the capabilities of gamers on different cognitive tests varying by which genre of game they played, as well as some extra information. These cognitive effects range from creativity to multi-object tracking, and I wanted to look for which genre not only gave the most positive cognitive effects, but also the widest variety of positive cognitive effects. Before we find an answer, we need to define genre. According to one of the studies I found, genres are separated by the core gameplay mechanics as well as what the player is supposed to accomplish inside of the game. However, it ends up being a little bit more complicated than that. Before resolving the complication of genre, we needed to find that when we are looking for a genre that gives the most positive cognitive effects, it means it has little to no negative effects, such as aggression. We also want to have a wide variety of these positive effects. To answer my question, we can look at these different research papers to find the different cognitive effects of genres. First, we can look at a more defined genre, rhythm games. According to this paper, How Musical Are Music Video Game Players, rhythm game players, called MVGPs, actually had better melody and tempo skills than classically trained musicians. However, the study states that there is evidence that active motor engagement might be needed for neuroplasticity. This means that cognitive skills musicians gain might, and probably don't, overlap with MVGP skills, meaning that rhythm games do not have a lot of good cognitive effects. Another study looking more into rhythm games also figured out that instead of learning the musical concepts of the games used, players were just perceiving and learning the game instead. This further enforces that classically trained musicians do not have much cognitive overlap with the gamers, providing traditional rhythm games to not be the winner. Next, we looked at enhancing cognition with video games, a multiple game study which focuses on different types of games. However, action games won almost every single one of these cognitive tests shown above, leaving all the other games in the dust. This bias towards action games can be explained by what Owen Patterson coined transfer effect, also referred to common demand later on. Another approach to explain transfer, that is, the more general train the process, as opposed to the process that is specialized for use in only one task, the greater amount of tasks, it will show improvement. Which basically means action game skills transfer well to the cognitive tests given, leading to higher usage of action games in cognitive testing. Since action games reign supreme so far, I wondered, do they have any negative effects? Action games tend to be competitive, so I looked at this study called The Effects of Violence and Competition Within Video Games on Aggression. They stated that the loss of a competitive match with a violent and non-violent version of the game yielded the same results, showing that aggression was caused by the loss over the violence in the game itself. So we can determine that action games do not have significant negative cognitive effects. The action video game genre that has won all of these cognitive tests is still too broad of a genre, so we cannot tell what parts of the genre are giving which cognitive effects. So I looked at a study called Video Games Can Increase Creativity, but with Caveats, which focuses on sandbox games. The study concluded that players of sandbox games did inhibit higher levels of creativity thereafter. This creativity is called trait creativity, which includes the concepts of convergent and divergent thinking. Trait creativity positively correlates with GPA, which means that sandbox games have small correlation with GPA, since they exhibit trait creativity. The only issue is GPA correlates negatively with video game play, leaving the true cognitive benefits convoluted. However, when the same game was played with a set fixed objective, the creativity results were less than even the people in the control group in some of the tests, specifically the drawing test. Now we can look back at genre, since a sandbox game with an objective is an entirely new type of genre and thus has different cognitive effects. The core mechanics that define the genre, as explained by Dabrowski et al., created a new genre. This issue makes answering my research question difficult, as there is no set criteria anymore for what defines a genre and keeps them apart. To solve this issue, I looked at another study who figured out this issue existed. Cognitive enhancement in video game players, the role of the video game genre, originally gave the definition of genre I brought up at the beginning of my talk. This study decided to split the king of cognition action video game genre into two different genres, being FPS, first-person shooter, and RTS, real-time strategy games. They did so because they also noticed that there was a bias towards action games, mentioning the transfer theory, talking about why action games are so good, which was referred to in Owen and Patterson's study. RTS games ended up beating FPS games in both multiple object tracking and reaction times, although the results were close, meaning that the general term of action game is too broad and the mechanics do seem to differ between action games. The study quotes, "We suggest that video games should not be treated as a black box which enhances cognition, but should instead be viewed from the perspective of what is necessary to succeed within the game and how that relates to specific cognitive functions." The study tells us that even if the genre has similar mechanics, almost identical sometimes, the goal inside of the game has the most effect on human cognition. This relates back to the sandbox game, where when there was a fixed task to complete, the creativity dropped, even though the game was identical to the game that was shown to have increased creativity after playing. This entire time we've been confused with the definition of genre, because even though we're looking at the same genres, they seem to be giving different cognitive effects. A meta-study on how cognitive effects are measured in video games and how that's changed over the years explains the true answers to how to define genre and how the game mechanics, RTS versus FPS, and play style, shown in sandbox versus controlled sandbox, seem to be a defining factor of cognitive development, with some extra twists. A new look at the cognitive neuroscience of video game play, co-created by Bavler herself, explains that not all games are the same when it comes to their cognitive effects, as we have already established from our previous research. The study points out that there was always a bias towards action video games in the different previously conducted studies, which we ended up noticing through some of the other studies that we looked at. This very broad action video game genre that was studied previously seemed to be composed of 5 criteria. 1. A fast pace. 2. A need for players to distribute their attention across a large field of area. 3. A need for players to focus their attention when required. 4. The need for the player to switch between these two previous states of attention. And 5. There should be enough variability in the game, such as in the behavior of the opponents, to prevent full tasks. The study also states that these action video game players who play the genre listed above have a slew of cognitive skills that are also listed above here. The issue is that the study also states that mechanics have become more global across modern games, which further blurs the line between the cognitive benefits of separate genres. Since all these aspects, the 5 criteria, have bled almost into every other game genre on the market, the best game genre is not possible to distinguish. What we do know is that the most positive cognitive effects do come from these 5 genres, which defined the quote action video game quote genre that was originally tested throughout these previous studies. Crucially, the specific mechanics implemented in the game, rather than the genre or the content of the game, appear to drive the changes in brain and cognition. The mechanics the study are talking about are these 5 action game criteria, which they then state to lead the cognitive benefits gamers receive by playing the game. The way the game is played is an important aspect as well. For example, playing a rhythm game that uses the mouse to follow and tap circles will be closer to an FPS game, cognitively speaking, than one where you use the keyboard to hit notes, which can have more objects on the screen to track, similar to an RTS/MOBA game. The issue is that these are both considered rhythm games as the genre, but the cognitive effects and benefits are different. Other examples in this phenomenon include competitive shooter games that include strategy, sandbox games that include puzzles, along with many other genres and subgenres created by modernization of mechanics and how the games are played. In conclusion, according to Dale et al., the genre with the most positive cognitive effects is not distinguishable. Rhythm games had weak cognitive benefits. Sandbox games' benefits changed based on how they were played. The very broad action video game genre could be considered a winner, but according to Dabrowski et al., it is too broad of a term and has to be split up into its own separate genres, which keeps it from being a winner. However, from our new study, we learned from Dale et al. That the 5 criteria which used to drive the cognitive benefits from the previous large, broad action video game genre have bled into all modern games. This means since those 5 criteria were linked with all of those positive cognitive effects, and if they have all bled into modern games, all of these modern games which have different types of these criteria, they all have the positive cognitive effects that came with having these criteria in a game. So the answer to the question, which genre has the most positive effects, could be every genre, depending on what criteria has been put into it. So knowing all of that, we can reconclude that whichever type of genre has those 5 criteria implemented the most, that genre can be considered the best positive, cognitively benefiting genre in existence. However, since the way you play the game also changes the cognitive benefits, that genre might be completely obsolete depending on how you play it, even if it has all 5 criteria. So it comes down to what mechanics the game have and how they're played. That is the answer to which genre has the most positive cognitive effects.